This is the Daniel Defense DDM4 version 7, and it's arguably one of the most popular and highly sought after AR-15s of today. But as most of you probably already know, these things aren't cheap. Because deep down, I really want to know what makes this gun so much more expensive than this gun. I don't mind spending a lot of money on something when it warrants the price, but sometimes products can be overhyped. And when things are overhyped, it can lead to a little bit of disappointment. And because this has happened to me quite a few times with overhyped products, it makes me wonder if that's gonna happen with the Daniel Defense. I'm looking for giant killers. A giant killer can be one or two things. The first thing a giant killer can be is a cheap gun that has the quality and the specifications of something from a higher pricing category. For reference on what I consider different pricing categories in AR-15s, I consider anything from about $400 to $1,000 to be lower end. Not that they're bad, they're just lower end. I consider anything that's $1,001 up to about $1,800 to be mid-tier pricing. And then I consider anything to be $1,800 and above to be high-end pricing. So with those things in mind, a giant killer would be something that is able to jump the categories. So for example, you got a mid-tier pricing, but you get the specs and the quality of the higher end rifles. A second way that a gun could be a giant killer is you have two guns from the same pricing category, but one far exceeds the other in specs and quality. Now, with those things in mind, it's also important to distinguish between a higher end gun and a Gucci gun. Higher end guns I consider to be guns that were kind of built for military. They got high-end specs, they're no frills. And then the Gucci guns are the ones that have like the fully ambidextrous lowers, they have the billet receivers, and things like that. They have a lot of extras that the military doesn't necessarily need. Another important thing to note is as we go through this video, we're gonna be talking about a bunch of different things, and you might be looking at this video being like, wow, I'd like to check the pricing on them. So I will put a parts list together for everything that you see in this video. The way you find that is the first link in the description. I'll also pin it in the comments for you as well. The next important factor, over the past month or so, I've gotten 7 total emails from people saying that they haven't been seeing my videos showing up in their subscriptions feed. They went and looked and they thought they were subscribed and they weren't. Double check, triple check that you're subscribed and you have all the notifications turned on. Now, as we go through this video of the DDM4 and some of the comparable alternatives to it, you're gonna notice a pattern in the things that they have in common. They all kind of focus on a few different key features of the AR-15. The first key feature is they really put a lot of pride and money into the barrel. Most of the guns that we're going to talk about today have something called a cold hammer forged barrel that is chrome lined. I'm not going to go into the weeds on this because I made a complete video about everything you need to know about different AR-15 barrels. And if you want to watch that after this video and learn all the ins and outs of AR-15 barrels, I'll put the link to that video down in the description for you. When it comes to cold hammer forged barrels and really high-end bolts that have, Carpenter 158 steel and all that stuff, there is a lot of arguments on the internet on whether cold hammer forge is better than nitride and whether nitride is better than this. I mean, you could go on for days. But the thing about cold hammer forged barrels is they're rated for rates of fire and they have the highest rate of heat resistance. So their claim to fame is they're the most durable barrels. On average, they last 20,000 to 25,000 rounds. So one of the downsides to cold hammer forging in the past, especially when they're chrome lined, is the chrome lining is such a tedious process that they had been known in the past to have inconsistencies in the coating on the inside of the barrel and the rifling, and had worse accuracy than the alternative, which is a 4150 chromoly vanadium nitrided barrel. However, in the past few years, especially with the increase in modern technology, that's simply not the case anymore. I know for a fact that these DDM4s, especially the version 7 on the 16-inch model, they shoot 1 MOA. And for reference, mil-spec is 4 MOA. So they are shooting a lot more accurately than standard mil-spec rifles. Now, the other thing to know about cold hammer forging is it's the most expensive way to manufacture a barrel because of having to add the coating to the inside, and the machine itself that does the hammer forging process is very expensive. The second thing that most of these higher end guns have in common is a lot of the companies make sure that the bolt carrier group is made of the highest quality materials and has the highest quality of QC done to them, you know, especially in regards to the high pressure testing, the magnetic particle inspecting. They also make sure that the extractors are good and that the lugs aren't going to shear off at the bolt. The third thing that a lot of these companies are going to pay attention to is the handguard. They want to make sure that the handguard is not going to move at all. And that is so when people in the military are using this and they want to use them for night vision and they want to mount an IR laser on here, they want to make sure that this handguard's not going to move a single millimeter, because that could throw off the zero of the IR laser. The next thing that a lot of these higher end companies are going to focus on is the gas block itself. A lot of these are going to have something called a cross-drilled gas block, and that's to ensure that this gas block does not move one iota despite being thrown through the mud in the swamps or in the desert and get kicked around, you know, being in helicopters and Humvees getting bounced around. Now, the next thing that a lot of these companies are going to have in common, which we will cover in a little more detail in a little bit, is most of them have military contracts. So that will be important later when we talk about pricing. The next thing that a lot of these companies are going to focus on, I'm not going to say all of them because I don't know what all of their processes are like for each individual company, but a lot of them are going to focus heavily on quality control. And quality control is the one thing on a rifle that you're not going to be able to feel or see, most likely. Quality control is expensive. Let's say Daniel Defense runs a batch of 100 barrels and they QC every single barrel. And let's say there's a 20% of those things fail. Well, they got to trash those things. Every company in the world is going to have different QC standards. Some companies have 100% QC, meaning every single, just say, barrel that comes off the line is going to be inspected. Some will say, let's inspect 1 in 5. Some will say, let's inspect 1 in 10. Part of the reason why some of these guns are more expensive is because they have higher quality QC standards. If you want to know more about what the QC process looks like, I highly recommend that you guys go check out School of the American Rifle. He does a lot of autopsy videos on barrels and bolt carrier groups, and he has this entire gauge set that he uses for pass and fail on bolt carrier groups, and you'd be amazed at how many quote unquote higher end companies fail that test and how many consistently pass it. So keep those things in mind. Highly recommend his channel. So before we get too far in the woods on doing a comparison, let's talk about the specs of the DDM4 real quick. Now, the DDM4 version 7 comes in a few different flavors. You can get them as a 16-inch rifle. You can get them as a 14.5-inch, which is the version that I have here called the SLW. You can get it as an 18-inch rifle, which is their Pro model. That one's more for competition use. That one also includes a better trigger in it. And you can get them as pistols. The most common one is going to be the 16-inch variant, and it comes in a ton of different colors. It comes in black, flat dark earth, cobalt, tornado, deep woods, rattle can, and probably my favorite color is mil-spec plus. It's just this really cool tan color. Unfortunately, this one that is the SLW only comes in 2 colors. It comes in black and deep woods. And we'll talk more about this color in a minute because I have a bone to pick about it. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, all of the Daniel Defense rifles are going to have cold hammer forged barrels that shoot about 1 MOA. At least on the 16-inch variants. All of the barrels are magnetic particle inspected, and they are chrome lined to prevent corrosion to the rifling. Their gas systems on the DDM4 version 7 are going to be mid-length, at least on the 14.5 and the 16. Also, they do the cross-drilled gas block on here. Geissele does that as well, and they call that the bomb-proof installation. The Daniel Defense bolt carrier group is magnetic particle inspected, Carpenter 158 tool steel, and it's chrome lined as well. In the DDM4 line, all the receivers are going to be forged. They're not going to be billet or anything like that. The rifle also comes with a beautiful ambidextrous charging handle. The grip and the stock and the foregrip all match each other, and they have this beautiful like rubber texture that's on them. Now, I've seen mixed reviews about the grip and the buttstock. Some people seem to like them, some people seem to hate them. To me, they're not bad. They don't bother me. The stock is kind of weird to grab it way up here when you want to extend it, but it's not a non-starter or a deal breaker for me. I don't feel like I'm in a hurry to swap these out. All of the controls are 100% mil-spec, and the trigger is mil-spec as well. The handguard that they use on the DDM4 is called the MFR rail, and it uses a very advanced system that attaches it to the upper receiver in a way unlike we've seen on any other gun. I'm not going to take it apart because it's really involved on getting it back on and off again, but I have taken it off before. It's not going to rotate. It's not going to slide off the end because they did such a phenomenal job on it. Also on the handguard, there is 6 different QD sockets. You have 3 on each side, 2 back here towards the rear on each side, and then 1 out here towards the end. And speaking of QD sockets, you also have 1 back here on the end plate, and then you also have 1 on each side of the buttstock. So you have a total of 9 different QD sockets on this gun. They do include 1 little mount plate for it. You don't want to just stick a QD socket into bare aluminum. That will rip out really easily and mess everything up. Now, one thing that the DDM4 version 7 is kind of known for is its lightweight. The 14.5 version that I have here comes in, they claim, around 5.9 pounds. When I weighed this without any optics or anything on it, I got about 6 pounds and like 5 ounces. It could be just because they weighed it without this foregrip on it and the foregrip comes on it. But nonetheless, this is one of the lightest rifles that we are going to be comparing today, and they did do a really good job at that. It's also not incredibly front heavy, so coming from low ready to fire is really easy, or if you're in the high ready and you need to fire, that is also just as easy. I am a big fan of 14.5s and 13.9s because they have that lighter front end for getting the gun out there and shooting. Now, when I was unboxing the DDM4 version 7, I found myself to be initially disappointed because although this is a quote unquote higher end rifle, it just didn't feel higher end in my hands. The first thing that threw me off was this Deepwood Cerakote is very glossy and very, very slippery in the hand. Now, this is the only Daniel Defense that I have tested, so I don't know if their other Cerakote colors are like that, but to me, I want something that has a little less gloss and a little bit more surface friction on it, because when you start sweating and stuff, I mean, you can see the glare in this on the camera. It's really slippery, and that kind of bothered me a little bit. The second thing that I noticed was there is a lot of play between the upper and the lower. Just listen. Play between the upper and the lower is not a bad thing per se. There's not a huge benefit between having a tight lockup and not having a tight lockup. But when you spend $2,200 on something, you expect it to not have that. Maybe they know something, I don't know. Let me know down in the comments if you know if there's a benefit to having slop between the upper and the lower. The third thing that kind of disappointed me was the mil-spec controls. For $2,200, I kind of expected, at least a better bolt catch and a better safety. I was also disappointed in the fact that it just has a standard 6.5 to 7 pound mil-spec trigger, especially at the price point. The one thing that bothered me the most though was this ambidextrous safety that it has on it. If you look at this safety, you'll notice that both sides are equal length. Usually on a gun that comes with ambi safeties, they will make the offhand side a little bit shorter than the primary side. And so because that safety was so long, I am unable to actually get a proper grip on this, come from low ready, and defeat the safety at the same time as pull the trigger, because that safety hits my trigger finger knuckle on my hand. Thankfully, they did include an Allen head on that side, and so I had to remove it in order to do the test and the review on it. Which brings me to my next con about at least the 14.5-inch model. It comes with a proprietary flash hider on it, but there is no QD mount for it for any type of suppressor. And because this is a 14.5, it's pin and welded. The other downside that I don't like about their 14.5 version is you can't choose any other muzzle device. And so the only way to get a different muzzle device is to take this to a gunsmith that knows how to remove pin welds, swap it out that way. That way you can get the muzzle device that works best for you, or get a muzzle device that works best for the suppressors that you use. I think they should offer different options for the muzzle device, especially on the 14.5 versions. Now, if you're gonna get like a 16-inch model, it doesn't really matter. You can just take those off, swap them really easily. Those things are a little bit nitpicky, I get it. But when you're spending $2,200 on a gun, you kind of expect a little bit more. Now, aside from that ambi safety issue, all of those other flaws or cons that I just listed seemingly disappeared as soon as I hit the gun range.
Bam! Is that the factory trigger?
Yeah, it smells spec. Despite having a 6.5-pound mil-spec trigger, I found that this gun was easy to shoot fast, and I found that it was easy to shoot flat. It was also surprisingly more accurate than I anticipated. I didn't really do any sub-MOA type test, but I was shooting a steel plate at about 75 yards offhand standing, and I was hitting it quite consistently. I mean, any rifle should, but this one just kind of surprised me on how I could shoot fairly quickly and still hit the steel. I also experienced 0 malfunctions during my testing, and I tested a bunch of different types of magazines. I tested PMags, I tested Lancer mags. Every other magazine fed reliably, every other magazine ejected properly, locked open on the last round, 0 malfunctions. Also during my testing, I mainly shot with 55 grain PMC bronze. I also shot with some 62 grain, 5.56, and I also shot with some 223 ammo as well, and everything seemed to be perfectly gassed in this configuration. However, I would assume if I was to suppress this, that I might have to get either a lighter buffer or a different type spring in order to offset the gas, because when you suppress a gun, it makes the gas pressures go up, and so your gun can become overgassed. So the pros and the cons of this guy. Pros are, it does include the vertical foregrip, it does include the QD sling mount, cold hammer forged barrel like we talked about, that's made in-house by Daniel Defense and has some of the best quality control ever. And they do good quality control on everything, but they especially pay attention to the barrels. It has a great bolt carrier group in it that also has great quality control. Now the cons. I've already talked about a few of the cons, but we'll just rehash them so that we have a good, concise list. Mil-spec controls, mil-spec trigger. The safety on the ambi side is way too long to be used. Muzzle device doesn't have QD. Now, aside from those, the only thing that I didn't like about this while I was at the range shooting it was I felt it was a little bit jumpy. Now, it wasn't crazy jumpy, it's just something I noted. Before we get into the comparisons with other guns and trying to figure out how we can reverse engineer something like this to be a lot cheaper, let's talk about whether or not I feel this is worth the money or not. In my humble opinion, I don't think that this gun is worth $2,200. I don't think that this gun is worth $2,000. I think this gun is worth about $1,800 max. And I'm talking about the 14.5 because I haven't tested the 16-inch. Now, when a company has a military contract for some of their guns, automatically inflates the price for 2 reasons. Number one, now they have a good reputation, and because they sold to the government, they can, tout that as bragging rights and inflate the price. The second reason why it makes the price go up is whatever they sell the gun to the government for, they can't sell it to the civilian market any cheaper. The other reason why I think that these guns are worth about $1,800 and not $2,000 to $2,200 is because you can sometimes find them for that price. And it's very rare that these go on sale, but the Deep Woods version of the 14.5 retails for like, I don't know, $2,200 from Daniel Defense. But if you go over to the parts list, you'll find where I found this for $1,700, $500 less. That's quite a big difference. For the same exact thing, Deep Woods, 14.5 pin welds. And I've also found like their 16-inch variant that's black for like, $15.99. That's one reason why I don't think it's worth this, just because from some of the third-party retailers, you can get it for less. But aside from that, the main reason that I don't think these are worth $2,000 to $2,200 is because you can get the DDM4 complete upper that has the bolt carrier group and it has the ambidextrous charging handle. And at full price, those only cost $1,175. Over at the parts list, you'll be able to find these for a lot cheaper than $1,175. I'm just quoting you the prices from Daniel Defense's website. Now, a couple downsides to the uppers, you can't get the 14.5. You can only get the 16-inch, the 18-inch, and I think some of the pistol links. So if you wanted to do the 14.5, you'd have to actually piece it together with their barrel, their upper, their handguard, and stuff like that. But if you pieced it together, it's actually not much more money than the $1,175. It comes out to a little over $1,200. But what that tells me is if these cost $1,175, that would mean that a complete lower, $825 for the black version, up to $1,000 for the Cerakoted version. And I'm sorry, but a forged lower that has mil-spec parts, mil-spec trigger is not worth $825 to $1,000. So I figured out a little trick the other day. So when you look at the quality of the Daniel Defense, what's separating this from, say, a $1,000 rifle? All of the things that make this stand out above the rest of the guns that you can buy is all encapsulated in the upper receiver. Cold hammer forged barrel that's chrome lined, your bolt carrier group, your proprietary, very sturdy handguard. Nothing in the lower is proprietary. Nothing about this lower is even special. And so if I was in the market to purchase a Daniel Defense, this is how I would do it for a heck of a lot cheaper. First, I would get their upper. If I was going for a 16-inch, or an 18-inch, I would buy their upper as a whole. If I wanted the 14.5, I would piece it together and spend the extra $80 and then get the muzzle device that I want for it. And then I would get this guy. This is a Leadstar Arms complete lower, and it has a Hyperfire Mil-Spec Plus trigger in it. And these complete lowers, they only cost about 180 bucks. There'll be info over at the parts list for you. The only thing I don't like about this lower is I don't really care for the stock and the grip, but I would upgrade those. You could put this entire thing together, put either a BCM or a B5 system stock and grip or a Daniel Defense stock and grip, and you can get out with this one for as low as $1,434, and the highest price I calculated was $1,538. The $1,538 would be if you piece together a 14.5, so keep those things in mind. But this one, you get the Hyperfire Mil-Spec Plus trigger. It pulls at about 2 pounds lighter than a standard Mil-Spec trigger. With this lower, it has way less wobble in it between the upper and the lower. Just something to think about, because none of the magic that they have is in their lower, it's all in the upper. And because these Leadstar arm lowers are made to mil-spec standards, it's not much different. Heck, you could even put this together, swap out your stock and your grip for, say, Daniel Defense or something else. You could get a Radian ambidextrous safety on there. Then you could upgrade to what I'm gonna call my favorite trigger of all times, which currently is the Blackout Defense hybrid trigger. They're about $200-ish. I could put all of that together. And if I did a 16-inch variant, it'd be about $1,700. And if I did a 14.5 variant, it would be about $1,844-ish. And I would have everything that I want in a gun. Now, with those things being said, just because I wouldn't want to go buy a DDM4 version 7 for those prices, they can be had for less prices at certain places. Like I mentioned earlier, I've seen their uppers for like $150 off. I've even seen their 16-inch variants for like $300 and $400 off. At those prices, I would totally buy it. Just wanted to throw that out there. I would buy one for the $1,500 mark to $1,700 mark any day of the week. I think they are at least worth that. Now, hopefully in the future, I can review their newest model, which is the DD4 R3 or the M4A1 R3. They're just a 16 and a 14.5 variant, but those have fully ambidextrous lower receivers. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can review that one in the near future. So now that we've gone through this from muzzle to the stock on all the ins and outs about it, and now that we've talked about why they cost what they do and how there's some cheaper ways to configure these, now let's get into their biggest competitors and what kind of value proposition that those types of companies offer with their guns. First rifle that I think would make a really good competitor to the DDM4 version 7 is something like the Bravo Company, also known as BCM, RECCE 14 or RECCE 16. Similar to Daniel Defense, BCM also has military contracts. Also, in a lot of their guns, not all of them, but in a lot of them, they use a chrome-lined cold hammer forged barrel. It's not called CHF. A lot of times when you're looking up cold hammer forged, it's called CHF. These are called BFH, whatever that means. I think they're getting their barrels from FN. I'm not 100% sure. Now, although this one doesn't have a handguard that has such an advanced system like the Daniel Defense, This one ain't going anywhere. This one's advanced in a different way. I've made videos on this in the past. I'll make sure to link them down below, but all you need to know is it seems to be just as secure. Now, one thing to note about BCM versus Daniel Defense is the gas block is on there very good. When I took this barrel off, I had to take this off in like some kind of magic way with the barrel wrench because I could not get this gas block off. This thing is set so well that I couldn't get these bolts to back out. And I didn't want to strip them, so I just left them as is. The reason I bring that up is you'll notice that these are not cross-drilled. You can have them cross-drilled if you want or swap them out. That's totally up to you. But just keep those things in mind. Although it's not cross-drilled, it is on there very, very good. But similar to Daniel Defense, BCM does 100% quality control checks. Additionally, this one is just as light as the DDM4 version 7 on the 14.5. This one is also a 14.5 and it also comes in right at 6 pounds or just a hair under. They also put a lot of time and effort and quality into their bolt carrier groups. They do some stuff with the extractor to make sure that the extractor doesn't wear out and it gets extra life, and it's also Carpenter 158 steel. But with their bolt carrier groups, you can choose to get either a black phosphate coated or you can get this brown. And this brown, it does say on their website that it is a type of phosphate coating. I don't know what it's technically called, but it does look kind of sexy. It's about $20 more than the black one if you want to get something that's a different color. They do 100% QC inspections on these, and they use high quality materials to make their bolts, and their bolts have a reputation of being very good. When I got this one a couple of years ago, they didn't have ambidextrous charging handles, but now when you get a BCM, they do have ambidextrous charging handles, or at least it's an option to get one. Also, similar to Daniel Defense, have all mil-spec controls and a mil-spec trigger. They do offer like flat dark earth butt stocks and grips and foregrips. And I will say the BCM stock, the BCM grip, and the BCM foregrip are among my favorites. I love the foregrip. The foregrip is not included. It is about 18 bucks. You got to buy it extra. But I like how they're kind of angled out. I like how they're a lot shorter than the one that's on Daniel Defense. And on this one in particular, I like the way that you actuate it. You simply grab this entire bottom piece and it will extend out. I love the grip texture. I like the angle of it. And I like the fact that it has a beaver tail on the back. I like because when this is angled out, you want to get your hand on it, man. Like you really feel like you can get your hand on this. And this has been one of my favorite guns that I've had the opportunity of owning and shooting since 2019 when I got it. The front of it is very light, so going from, you know, low ready or high ready is very easy. Another thing that stands out with these versus Daniel Defense is you do have an option of getting different muzzle brakes. This is not one of them. I did a barrel swap on this one because I wanted to use a different muzzle brake, and the muzzle brake that I have is pin and welded. But on theirs, they have like 3 or 4 different options for muzzle brakes when you order their uppers. And some of them have some QD mounts on them for, you know, like Surefire and stuff like that if you're using their suppressors. So you get a lot more options in regards to the muzzle device. I don't remember what this one is off the top of my head, but I will annotate it on the screen. But this is one of their own muzzle devices. And with this on there, I haven't shot this gun in its current configuration with this barrel, but this gun shoots super fast and super flat. I would say probably aside from having military contracts, having really well-built rifles, and having 100% QC on their guns, the best part about these is they're a lot cheaper than Daniel Defense. At full price, they're like $1,700 to $1,800. If you don't buy the full gun and you just buy, say, their completed lower, which is like $400, and then you get their upper, which is about $700 and something. Something to keep in mind is their uppers don't include the charging handle, nor do they include the bolt carrier group. But if you added all of those things together, the complete lower, the barreled upper with your muzzle device, and the bolt carrier group and the charging handle, you can get these for as little as like $1,466, and that's not even on sale. But similar to the Daniel Defense, like I showed you using this lower right here, you could actually get their upper, their bolt carrier group, and their charging handle. You could buy the BCM stock and the grip separately, and you could get out with like $1,300. And honestly, this gun at $1,300, even if you're not using their lower, is really good price. It's one of those guns that you really just can't, I really can't transfer the experience of what it's like through the camera. You just have to shoot one and feel it for yourself. It's very well balanced. But you can pick these up for a heck of a lot cheaper than you can on the Daniel Defense, and they are just as good. Now, for the next comparison, I think that we need to take a look at this guy. This is the Geissele Super Duty that I reviewed about last year at this time. What makes this gun special, this gun not only shares all of the same specs as the previous two guns, being the BCM and the Daniel Defense, but they've also taken it up a few notches with the quality of this and added a couple of Gucci parts to it as well. Similar to the previous two guns that we looked at, Geissele has military contracts. These are using cold hammer forged barrels, which are magnetic particle inspected and high pressure tested. Additionally, they have an incredible handguard on here. These two bolts right here are, I forgot what the torque specs are, but they're measured in foot-pounds, not inch-pounds. I forget what it is. I will put it on the screen for you. Additionally, on the QD spots on the handguard, they actually have inset tool steel into the QD spots. You don't got to worry about adapters, and they put those on both sides. On top of the receiver set, you can see how this handguard has a key notch into the upper receiver to prevent rotation. So you can mount your optics and IR lasers to this and don't have anything to worry about. Moving further back to the bolt carrier group, this is where Geissele really took things up quite a few notches. So not only is it magnetic particle inspected and high pressure tested, not only is it Carpenter 158 steel and chrome lined, but more than that, they didn't want to start with standard Carpenter 158 tool steel. They wanted to take it above and beyond. So Geissele partnered up with a company that has Carpenter 158 metallurgists employed there, and they created something called Carpenter 158 Plus. According to the Geissele's website, they state that the Carpenter 158 Plus steel is cleaner, having less impurities in the composition of the metal, resulting in a lot stronger and more consistent metal. Additionally, they actually forged the bolt in the same process they used to forge their lowers and their uppers. And they claim that the forging process changes the grain structure of the metal so much that it increases the strength by 5 times versus standard Carpenter 158 steel. In addition to that, they also took really good care in using high quality springs in the extractor so that those don't wear out very quickly. However, that does cost money. The previous two bolts we looked at were roughly $200. I believe the Daniel Defense is $220, and I think the Bravo Company is $180 for the black and about $199 for the brown one. This one costs $385. This is the most expensive bolt that I own and that I've ever even tested. So that's saying a lot, but they didn't stop there. Instead of offering just a black or Cerakote colors, they offer anodizing. So you can get these in Luna Black. This one here is in the Desert Dirt Coyote, I believe, and everything is anodized from the receiver set to the handguard to the buffer tube. Additionally, they have a very nice ambidextrous charging handle, which is also anodized. For the controls, they give you an enhanced bolt catch, and they give you the Geissele 2-stage trigger, but it feels like a single-stage trigger when you're shooting fast. And this trigger breaks right at 3 pounds, if not a little bit less. It also comes with a B5 system stock. I had a couple of gripes with this gun. One was I did not like their OEM grip because their OEM grip stuck too far out like this. So I replaced it with a B5 Systems grip. However, with that said, I did notice on some of the newer Geissele's that their standard grips are now more vertical. However, they don't have the beaver tail back here. So if you need a beaver tail, you still need to swap out the grip. Nonetheless, they got rid of that grip that's way out like this. It's now at the same angle as this one. And then after that, the only other thing that I didn't like was the mil-spec 90-degree safety. So I threw on a matching FDE Radian 4590 ambidextrous safety. Now, the one downside to this gun versus the previous two is this one's about a pound heavier. This one doesn't come in as light as those, even though that this one is a 14.5. Another downside is when you get the 14.5, if you buy it as a complete gun, you don't get to choose your muzzle brake. So their muzzle devices, they don't offer any QD on them, I don't believe. I could be wrong, but I think the muzzle device that they have on these now versus when I got this a year ago are a little bit different. They also went the extra mile and they did what they call their bomb-proof installation on the gas block, so it is cross-drilled and pinned into place just like the Daniel Defense. Now you're probably thinking, after I threw all that information at you with all these things that are upgraded on these guns, that these are gonna cost well over $2,000. And you'd be surprised to know that this gun and this gun from Daniel Defense are very close to the same price. On the list price, these are about $100 more than the Daniel Defense. However, just like on the Daniel Defense, you can get these for a heck of a lot cheaper because I know some super sneaky ways to take money off of these things. That information's available at the parts list for you. Obviously with these, the Luna Black is always gonna be cheaper than the colored version. So you could get a Luna Black one, you could get the 16-inch for about $17.59 before you take money off of it. And then with special ways to take money off, it comes out to about $15.83. And then with the colored versions are about $19.79 from different retailers. But when you take money off with special ways, they come out to about $17.82. That is a really good price for everything that you get for this. The one thing that makes this one unique is the entire gun is kind of special, not just the upper receiver. Like with the Daniel Defense and even with the BCM, there's not a whole lot going on with the lower. It's all mil-spec parts in the lower, unless you can count the grip and the stock. So it worked out where you could get a cheaper lower to make those guns cheaper. The problem with doing something like this, with this, is you miss out on this beautiful Geissele trigger, you miss out on the bolt, the maritime bolt catch, and you miss out on the beautiful anodized tube here. Those are some things to keep in mind when you do that. So the best way to get this one for less money, to me, is they have build kits for these in all the different sizes and different colors. Basically, the build kit is everything except for this lower receiver. And when you do it that way, you can get out at like 1,500-ish for these things. And to me, that's a steal. So earlier in the video, I was talking about, I'm looking for giant killers. And I said a giant killer is something that either jumps from one price bracket to compete with a gun that is in a different price bracket, or it's two guns that are in the same price bracket, but one completely surpasses the other. And so between the Daniel Defense DDM4 V7, the Geissele Super Duty, and the BCM, I would say that these two are the giant killers. Why do I say that? Well, number one, without any finagling of this, you can put a BCM together for less than $1,500. And if you remember from earlier, I said anything from $1,000 to $1,800 I consider to be mid-level pricing. However, that gun is spec'd almost the same as this gun. And these guns, with no discounts, are $2,000 to $2,200. So therefore, because they're spec'd the same, because they both come from companies with military contracts, I would say that this one is the giant killer. Now, that is the one that jumps pricing points, but these two are in the same pricing category. In fact, this one might be just a tad bit more expensive on their list price. But if you have been paying attention, you'll know that you don't really got to pay the full list price for any of these. But this one is so well over-engineered and gives you a better trigger, gives you a better bolt catch, it gives you anodizing instead of Cerakote, things of that nature. This one is the giant killer from this category, being in the higher end price range. Now that we've learned what these companies are doing to these guns to make them higher end, is there any way we could get all those same specs, maybe even a little bit more, but for a much cheaper price? I think so far the cheapest that we could do one of these guns was about $1,200-1,300, and that was the BCM with the lead star arms lower. But what if I told you there was a cheaper way than that? Basically, you could take any rifle, get a cold hammer forged barrel, get a really good bolt carrier group, and get a really good mounted handguard if your handguard doesn't have a good mounting system. Any of these handguards will work. You could put a Daniel Defense handguard on a non-Daniel Defense upper. You could also put the BCM handguard on a standard upper. You could also do the Geissele, which I have right here. In fact, this upper receiver right here has a FN cold hammer forged barrel. It also has a cross-drilled and pinned gas block, and it has a Geissele handguard on it. And this is not from Geissele. This is actually a Palmetto State Armory upper receiver that I think cost at the time about $750 or $800. Now this one's in a 16-inch, but you can get these with pin and welds. And the gun that we're going to be referring to, and I don't have it in my hand yet, is the Palmetto State Armory Saber line. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Now the PSA Saber just launched. I got to handle one at SHOT Show, but I haven't shot one yet, so I can't tell you what it feels like. But here's the specs on it. They got two versions. They got a forged and they got a billet. The forged line comes with a cold hammer forged barrel, and you could choose your barrel length. They got 13.7, 13.9, 14.5, and they're pin welded with different muzzle attachments. They got things that have chemo mount. They got muzzle devices that have surefire mounts. They got other ones as well. Additionally, some of them come with that Geissele rail on it. And some of them come with B5 Systems stocks, B5 Systems grips. But in addition to that, they all have a mil-spec plus hyperfire trigger, which is like this one that's in this lead star arms. And it's not quite as good as, those drop-ins or like my favorite Blackout Defense trigger, but they are a heck of a lot better than mil-spec. And they come with Radian safeties on ambidextrous, and they come with a Radian charging handle. Essentially, they have everything that I wish that these guns would have for about anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200, depending on which one you get. I'll have more information over at the parts list so you can know where to find them. But then they have another line called the billet line, and it's a billet receiver group, and they are fully ambi, and they have an ambi bolt release. The only downside to the billet line is you don't get cold hammer forged barrels, but you can get a nitride chromoly vanadium barrel that is pin and welded also. Bunch of different variations, and that's a gun that I think if it performs as good as it felt at SHOT Show, and I've seen a few reviews on it and people are liking it so far, if it performs as good as these guns, that gun will be the ultimate giant killer because base price is like $9.99. Something you guys should definitely look into. Now, there's one gun that we haven't mentioned yet, and that's this guy. I made a video on this guy last year, but nobody in the world makes an AR-15 like this. This gun has literal aerospace NASA type technology into it. And the reason that I bring this gun up right here is because they just updated it, and there's a few things that are different about it that we will be making a video on in the future. But let me just put it like this. This gun isn't a direct competitor to any of the other guns that we looked at today. This one doesn't have the cold hammer forged barrel. This one has some other type of technology in the barrel that I really think you need to see, but I'll have a video coming on this one in the future. But in the meantime, go check out this video right here that covers the first version and you'll see what I'm talking about. But until next time, guys, I love you. You guys stay sexy.